So if you ever have issues with cloud page launches, so if you ever have a user who's getting who has issues with cloud page launches, this slide is another good reference slide. But the main thing is you want to see, is the app running in the player? So by that, I mean there's a status here for your apps. So if I close Audacity here, it won't be showing as running, it'll be showing as ready. So is the app running in the player? If the app is able to run in the player, at that point, you want to check either the package itself, or you want to check to see if the app itself is throwing an error. So sometimes you run into apps, they might have bugs, whether they're cloud paged or locally installed. That's usually a good thing to rule out to see if you get the same error on a locally installed version of the app. Sometimes it might be a problem with the network. So it might be an app that is performing slow over a network, or it might just be something, in which case it would be something that you may have to check in the packaging of the app. So you may have to bring it to the team that's packaging the app and say, hey, this app isn't performing great on this network or in this location or just in general. So that's if the app shows as running in the player. If it's running in the player, it's usually an app set issue or an application package issue, or just an app bug in general. If it's not running in the player, that's when it's a cloud paging error, meaning something wrong with the cloud paging player or something wrong with the cloud paging connection. So if you ever get an error thrown by the cloud paging player whenever you try to run the app, sometimes or a lot of times if it's a cloud paging error, the app doesn't even make it into the player. It'll just try to make it in the player and it won't. At that point, we would want to check the cloud paging player logs. Sometimes actually, never mind. Sorry, I don't have a good example of that. But yeah, if it doesn't make it to the running status in the player, that's when we want to check the cloud paging player log, because that'll tell us exactly why. So the player has a log, and we have an article that goes over where the different log locations are in the environment that I'll give you guys after the training here. So this is a log file viewer I have. It works with just regular Notepad as well. And in the center is a column. So it'll say info, verbose, and there will also be error. I don't think I have an error in my log here as an example, but it'll show error in here. So if I'm ever investigating a cloud paging player log after a failed launch, I'm just going to go to the bottom and search error and go up. And that'll point me in the right direction. So the error will tell you generally why. So it'll say unable to make a connection to a paging server. So you can see in the log here, it talks about testing connection to servers, which are demo site servers, and then it'll say successfully connected. So if you ever have a user who's unable to connect to your servers, that would show up in the log. If you ever, there's a few things you can do with cloud paging packages, such as running scripts. You can run scripts as part of your cloud paging packages. And if the script fails, the player won't even try to launch the app because it assumes that the script has to succeed for the app to run. So you'll see in the log if the script fails to run. You'll also see if the player was unable to write a physical file. In general, it'll just all tell you here what it is, and then you can sort of use that information to help out. Some of the errors you may, again, have to escalate to the team who's packaging it. But in general, that'll give you a decent explanation of what it could be. So yeah, generally with the cloud paging apps, you just want to, you can pretty much use this graph to say, is it running in the player? If so, it might be a packaging issue. If not, check the logs. To sort of help you out with that, if you have an app that is running but not running well, or maybe returning an app-specific error. So you could either get an error thrown by the app or an error thrown by the cloud paging player. If it's an error thrown by the app, it would typically be an error saying as if you had a corrupt install, telling you to install the app again. In that case, it might be missing a dependency that the app needs. So some apps rely on .NET. If the user doesn't have .NET and the right .NET, it might not work. There's ways you can get around that in the packaging, which we go over in the course there, but something that might come up. Same with C++ redistributable. If a user's missing it and it's not packaged in the app, that might return an error as well. So application-specific errors might be missing dependencies. It might be that the user's running it on a fairly low-spec machine and they're unable to run the player. So that's the specs that the player needs. Sometimes antivirus targets the player the same way it can target the AppsAnywhere client, and again, that's something always good to roll out. So again, I'll get you a article that goes over antivirus exclusions for the player and the AppsAnywhere client, if that does happen to run into it. This slide is some fairly standard troubleshooting that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but it's nice to have in there just because sometimes if you're, it basically reinforces the point of you want to compare it with a local install versus a cloud page running of the app to see if it is specifically a cloud paging packaging error. So it's always helpful to see if you can reproduce the problem on another machine. And then this is a bit of a, I always forget what these are called, anagrams, but it's just something when you're checking logs, best practice to do. So if you ever have to check the log for something, when you go to the options of it, it defaults to extended for the logging level. That gives you all the details. But in general, if you want to get a full log, I would say remove the app from the player. Let's see. Go to the options and clear the cache, because that clears all the cached data in the player's local cache. And then launch the app again. And then that gives you the full picture in the log of what's happening.